Well, I guess when I go back a bit, on our first day, Rebecca had us come in and just respond to the environment, walk around, see how we felt. As I think sometimes we may have pre-notions of, oh my God, what are we going to do? We're going to have to create some art. And it's like, just come in, see what your reaction was. And it wasn't until about the third or fourth week, I think, that I started thinking about the bathroom. And I think early on, I realized there was the buzzer. There was a little speaker there that seemed like it would be appropriate for sound. When you flip the lights, this yellowy orange light goes on in there, and I don't know if that's supposed to be a security light or what it initially was, but it reminded me of a darkroom. And so one week I started to think, maybe there's something about being in a bathroom where the lights, sort of make me feel like I'm in a dark room. And it made me think of the process when you're developing photos and you're exposing negative and then developing it, then stopping, then fixing, then stopping, and then hanging your print out to dry. And initially I had an idea of doing something along that line. And then I think the next week when I came in, I started to think, well, in the bathroom, that's one of the places that we go that's private, where we can close the door and be with our thoughts, and especially in a patient environment. And that got me thinking about the thought records you do when you're in CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're looking at your thoughts and what you're thinking about and trying to, not analyzing, but at least recognize them. Yeah, so I just sort of went with that idea. And it's funny because after the election, there were all these, I had the idea before the U.S. election, but then after the election, there were all these stories on the internet about this guy who'd started this thing called subway therapy, where he had people sticking up sticky notes saying how they felt. And what I was trying to do on a small scale was, it was an attempt to be more personal, like people could shut the door, though we didn't end up doing that in the end. Shut the door, stop for a moment, be present, be mindful. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? And stick it on the wall. And, I put up a few sticky notes initially, and then just some ideas. So people walked in there and they didn't understand what to do. They'd have some ideas like, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling, sad, or something like that. I guess graphs, sort of that. I know when I did therapy, or when I do therapy, my therapist would say, you're giving me a report. How do you feel? And in CBT, there's actually a spot in the book where there's, you don't think about all the feelings that you can go through. And there's actually these charts that list a whole bunch of feelings. So I thought if people were having trouble figuring out what they're feeling, they could look at that.
The final product was exceptional. It was amazing. I loved working with Rebecca Houston. She made it so easy. I went in with real expectation, just sort of ideas about how I would, what I would talk about. Do I want to talk about my illness? Do I want to talk about the great work that people have done to help me? When we first got there, we didn't have the title inpatient. We were working for 2 sessions with about 4 hours each, working to find out where we wanted to start. And of course, from a starting point, you want to get to where do I want to go. And then each person, which is the amazing thing, we worked on little pieces. Like most of us never took those pieces to the final that we had, but each week we had little pieces where we could look at each other, critique each other, and take it beyond most of the major work. And I must credit everyone who was involved. We are very, very talented. That's why I said it was a splendid little performance thing we had. It involves more than just your want to live, more than just your want to play a game. It has to do with making sense of the world when perhaps you're too depressed to make sense of the world, or you're too high to make sense, right? Yeah. So I was looking at it as what was on my mind during those times, and I found that because I was a child of technology with a computer in my hands, that sort of otherworldliness outside of your own body becomes the thing that is your life. So all around the bedroom, I call it my bedroom, I put Got Game around. I had a laptop at the head of my bed instead of a pillow. And on it was like my experiences. There's no actual verbal words in it. It's all visual. So all the video was showing the ground, I should say. The ground beside a big building, an institution. And I think as a metaphor it works as in, you never really know where you are. You could be beside the airport, you could be beside God, you could be beside the police station, right? And there it was, the ground was where I was, and that was the laptop. And then there was a portrait that I painted earlier in the year, and it just happened to fit, like by coincidence.
Nice. That was your self-portrait.
Yes,
right?
it was. It was totally up on the wall. So.
I'm Annalise Walmer, and my interactive performance piece called Admissions was to allow people to experience what it might be like to go through the admissions process at an emergency department of a hospital or at a psychiatric hospital if they were in psychiatric crisis. My process evolved through memories of me being in mental health crisis, the fears of what might happen if I were to go to a hospital in crisis, based on what I'd heard from others and also from representations or misrepresentations shown in film and TV, and also stories from documentaries about mental health. I've volunteered with the Rendezvous with Madness Film Festival for a number of years and have seen both feature narrative films and documentaries, so that informed me. I also learned from accounts from friends and other people in group therapy sessions about what they'd gone through. My favorite part of the performance and the project was actually making the art, including the spiral of Freud illustrations that I borrowed from the Rendezvous with Madness promo, and then performing and embracing the character of Nurse Lucy Freud, as I ended up calling her. I really enjoyed the interactive aspect, seeing people's responses, hearing people's responses. I warmed up to it and was able to start making some comments. It was all improvised. I had a few guidelines, a few questions that I was going to ask people, but I riffed on that. And so I also enjoyed how my part, my aspect, my performance and the art that I'd made and at the admissions desk tied in with the other projects, the other artists' works as a whole, and how they flowed into one another. Right beside the admissions desk was the patient room that Julie had made, and there was a hammock and leaves and nature sounds, and some of those sounds would come into my area. I had recorded hospital sounds through voice and moving stuff around in the space earlier on with some of the other members, and that provided the soundscape for my piece. So it sort of had an overall hospital sounding environment.
Initially, when we explored the building on our first day, I was drawn to this room, which is across from the nurses' station and has a big window so the nurses could see in, and then window on the side door, and shut the door, and you're contained in that area. So essentially there's 3 walls. So essentially it's an enclosed space, like there would be an enclosed space across from the nurse's station in a hospital where they could keep an eye out on a patient. I think it was perhaps an observation room, that's why I called it there, that. And when I was in there, when I first went in there and I shut the door, and then I've seen performance art pieces like Marina Barbonich, where she does that thing where she sits across from the person and just looks at them for a
Yeah.
period. And I think something that I've been figuring out on my own is, I think a lot of us that work in the arts are trying to use our art to express ourselves. And when I initially went in that room, there were some bicycle wheels, and so I picked one up and I could actually get grease from it, and I smudged it on the window, and it was sort of a way of trying to communicate out. But I
Yeah.
think by the end of the piece, perhaps you see, I don't know if it came across, that in the end I think I was trying to communicate with myself through my art. It was sort of a scary thing for me to do because I've never done anything like that. Earlier this year I was really affected by seeing another performance artist do a piece where she was wearing a mask, and so after watching her repeatedly do movements, her name is Sarah Ann Johnson, and she has a piece called Hospital Hallway, and after seeing that work,
Yes.
it kind of moved me. So when I was in that space on my own, not really thinking too much about the audience initially, I just it was sort of like, okay, you're trapped in a space, but people can see you and you can see them. How do you communicate? And I have a family history where a family member was in an institution, so I think there's a bit of historical context. I really enjoyed working with Rebecca, who sort of set us free in this space and said, okay, let's see how you respond. And she encouraged us, no matter, where we were going. She sort of, didn't try to censor us, which I think was
Yes.
a good part of the process of, trying to explore something that is site-specific rather than bringing your own preconceived ideas onto something. Let's just see how you respond. So I appreciated that. And also, there was a little bit of collaboration with the other participants in terms of
Yes.
helping with, the shadows in a video or getting ideas for the room that had the hammock. And I think the energy of having different people who were doing different things, but who could also support each other, and was really important.
Instructor Rebecca Houston. She was able to bring us all together, ultimately showcase our work. I found it extremely interesting because I've never worked on such a collaborative level before. And I also feel that because of the size of the group, which is relatively small, there was a lot of input from my fellow artists and input from Rebecca. And that would not have been possible if we had a really large group, and if we were in, let's say, a site that was overwhelming. The pop-up gallery itself was perfect in size. The ultimate installation and our showcase. One of the things that was a focal point was to respond to the site, and not just to the pop-up gallery and the fact that it was going to be torn down, but for me it went beyond also the grounds of what was formerly the Provincial Lunatic Asylum. And what I wanted to do was to incorporate the history of the asylum, and therefore I called my piece Asylum, and bring it into the present. And one of the key themes for me was the wall that surrounds the property, and it's a historical wall. That piece was incorporated through the use of walls on the site. Was a tiled wall, which I use as a backdrop, and it represents the physical wall of the actual asylum. And so with that in mind, I wanted to somehow work in the past, and the way I could do that best was to create projected imagery. And this projected imagery, initially it felt like there were ghostly presence from the past, but it became more than that. It was a statement of what I felt or mental health issues. What was it like to be a patient 166 years ago, to be a patient in the present? So that's kind of how the idea unfolded. For me, it was doing the work. It was coming up with the ideas. I initially did not feel that I could complete an installation. I felt at times overwhelmed, but because I had other people assisting, in particular with the projection, it was the physical work and being able to see it through. I felt extremely challenged, and I was very pleased that I was able to convey a feeling, convey a thought in the finished piece.
One last fall before they're felled, standing bare for slaughter, cut before your time by your very maker. This life was chosen for you, but it was not in vain. Now your use is through, you've given it your all. Through changing times unyielding, patience, beauty, and grace, built in your image, you shroud the sterile floor. Where you once grew, we will grow, man-made tranquility. Your time is over, unnatural peace. I think the coolest part was every class we got to do like a random art activity just for fun that was very responsive and not for any sort of like publication or whatever. It was just for us, so that was really cool, and I thought it got us thinking about the space and about what you could do. Rebecca was very good. She gave us lots of good feedback, and she did some really cool stuff. And actually, one of her pieces where she took us outside and sanitized her hands and was like telling the trees that they were going to die was kind of one of the inspirations for that poem, about how they were going to die and it was their last autumn, whatever. It was be patient, because I think that that's something that we don't do enough of, and I think everyone can do some for mindfulness and wellness and mental health. So, and then I was thinking about what kind of space you would want to sit in, and I don't think it's very relaxing to be in like sterile patient rooms in hospitals. So, and I always I grew up in BC, so nature is kind of where I find to be peaceful. So I brought a little bit of nature inside, and first I was going to do grass, but I couldn't do that because logistically it was difficult. So, but then the leaves I think were better for the site specific.
And there's this thing that just develops. You don't even notice it's developing, that you have a life when before anything else would have a life. So what the window was and the states of being was, I figure a lot of us are a minority, and minorities are by the given argument very. Yeah, they're like singled out. They're seen as different. So I used my case to say, no, I'm not only just different or inferior or whatever. I am a sort of model. I can be a mannequin for you, and I wanted them to understand that it's a lifestyle. I wanted them to understand that it has to do with being human as much as anything else. So as a mannequin, I reacted to the cards that I gave them with the states of being, 20 states of being. Started out with I'm okay, I can smile, I smoke, I'm not too bad, I'm smiling. Yeah. So with each card that was presented, I became that being, that state.
Yes. So
it was more almost reactionary, you might call the windows. It was definitely very I needed to make the point. It wasn't as static as the bedroom, the God game thing. So I had the people realize the reality of life. You know, there I was inpatient, and there they were outside. You know, we affect each other just as much as we affect others that we are around.
Definitely.
Everyone. Yeah.
And if you wanted some people to take away a little bit, what initially would you like people to understand about?
Perhaps don't think it's all glamorous. It's a lot of hard work, you know. It's not only like me doing a job. Like, I understand a lot of people punch our jobs, but trying to make sense of your life and support yourself is a very big educational and living well sort of issue.